Hey YouTube, this is Evergreen Stater again. I'm back with part 2 of my video about South Africa and apartheid, and there are some more things I wanted to touch on about apartheid in South Africa. Now, before I go into more about South Africa and the stuff that was done during apartheid, there's something else I want to mention. Many of the policies that were practiced under apartheid, many of them came before apartheid was officially implemented. You know, you had laws. You know, before the Cape Colony became the Union of South Africa, you had an act that prohibited blacks from being on the streets of major towns after dark. Now think about that. A lot of people are going to look at it as, well, it's the Cape Colony, it's technically not their country. And let me tell you something. South Africa was not barren, and well, it was, some parts were barren, but it was not empty. There were still people living in South Africa. Somebody comes in, okay. The Afrikaners, they came in. Now, a lot of these laws were not implemented by the Afrikaner. I agree with that. It was started under British colonialism. That's where it started. You had these laws, and, well, the way I see it, I look at it as somebody coming into the place that you're living and telling you, you can't live here, you gotta live over there. Or you can't live here, gonna live here now, and you're gonna live over there. Any way you slice it, sounds like fascism to me, and theft in some ways. Telling people in their own country, now you might say, oh, that's not their country because they didn't establish it, they were there first. You know, the original South Africans were the Khoisan, and then later on you had Bantu people such as the Xhosa and the Venda and the Ndebele and other peoples coming down from the north. Some of them mixed with the Khoisan, and you had other events going on such as the Mvikane, and you also had the Boers going inland, descendants of the Dutch coming in from the Netherlands. But aside from that, somebody comes in and tells you, you can't live there. Aren't you gonna be a little upset? Now, the way that wasn't the only one. The pass laws, where you had to carry a passbook, that came before apartheid became an official policy. And you had some other stuff. Black people were restricted to certain parts where they could live. You could only live in the reserves, and you couldn't own land outside of the reserves you were assigned to, unless you lived in the Cape, unless you were already living in the Cape. And then another law came around to where blacks couldn't buy land anywhere outside of reserves. Now, to put this all into perspective, around 1970, during apartheid, the middle of the apartheid years, blacks made up 69% of the population, and yet they lived on about 13% of the land, and some of it was the worst. Whereas whites made up about good 15-16% of the population, and I don't know how much, but I know it was a minority. but you had a relatively small part of the population owning a big chunk of the land, and a lot of it was good land. But to Stellenbosch, where you had all the vineyards and stuff. You know, a lot of it owned by white people. I'm not saying they weren't good farmers. I'm just saying these Homeland Acts and other stuff, the way stuff was distributed in the beginning, the way stuff was in the beginning was not really fair. Of course, a lot of people don't look at it as there should be fair and not fair. It's looked at as business, whatever. I don't look at it that way. Fair is fair, unfair is unfair. And what isn't fair is for somebody to tell you, you have to live here, you can't live there. Or to basically crowd people onto small plots of land. Education was another thing. You had... Now, it was bad enough that education was mandated to be segregated. But if you look at the universities, there were only 3 universities for blacks. 3. 1 for colored, and I think about 9 or 11 for whites. Considering blacks make up the majority of the population in South Africa and always have, it seems like you have the minority being reserved the lion's share of the universities and the majority given only 3. And then you look at the lower levels of the education, the elementary, middle school, high school years, the public schools. You look at that. The amount of money that was spent on white education was a lot more than what was spent on black education. In fact, I think in estimate around 1980, you had 1,000 rand spent on educating whites per child and about 200 rand per child for black education. And a lot of those schools that blacks were attending didn't have plumbing, didn't have proper electricity or running water or plumbing, the stuff that they needed. Yeah, same curriculum, but the infrastructure was not equally distributed. Bad enough, it was segregated, but you also had inequalities and imbalances in the infrastructure. That's what you had. So those who say apartheid was good for South Africa are saying apartheid was a success for South Africa. If you were white, it was. If you were black, you were not treated equally. You were treated really bad. And if you ever spoke out against the government in South Africa, well, you go to jail and you possibly die in jail. Sounds pretty fascist. Alan Paton, he was a known anti-apartheid activist. And after he wrote a book, he got his passport taken away. This was right after Daniel Malan became president. And unfortunately, that just shows you how disturbing apartheid is, how stupid it is. Yes, the government in South Africa today is corrupt. Jacob Zuma is being an idiot. Julius Malema trying to shut down Twitter. You know what? That's stupid. You know, that's pretty much almost like back in the apartheid days where if you spoke out against the government, you go to jail. This is not the South Africa that should have been. The South Africa, the way it should be, is we're all in this together. Nobody's killing anybody, and you're all treated as human beings, as children of the Most High God. None of this apartheid stuff. Unfortunately, right now I know South Africa's having problems. I just hope things will get better. This is Evergreen Stater signing off. Have a nice day.